Just as Margot and Detective Cross prepare to make their final move, they discover that the critical piece of evidence tying Victor to the criminal networks has mysteriously disappeared. During a tense confrontation, Victor reveals he has been monitoring Margot's every move and unveils damning information that could implicate her instead. With the tables turned, Lydia, desperate and cornered, switches sides and offers to testify against Victor. However, just as she's about to meet Margot and Cross, her car is forced off the road by an unknown assailant. Margot receives an encrypted email from an unknown source claiming to have irrefutable evidence against Victor, but they demand a meeting in person. When Margot arrives at the designated location, she's greeted by someone from her past she thought she'd never see again. Victor smugly reveals that Margot's own father had once helped him cover up the initial illegal dealings. This revelation not only shatters Margot emotionally, but also complicates her plans for justice. Welcome to the Alibis Exposed, where trust meets betrayal in the dark. Margot Lane sat in her sunlit home office, staring at the financial reports spread across her desk. The spreadsheets, usually a source of pride, now felt like a suffocating reminder of what she had built and what she might lose. The air smelled faintly of lavender, a scent she once loved, but it had become another irritant. The room, like her life, was meticulously arranged, but cracks were beginning to show. Victor, her husband of 8 years, had always been her partner in business and in life. Together, they had turned Lane Industries into a powerhouse of finance and consulting. Margot had poured her intellect and countless sleepless nights into the company. Victor, with his charm and connections, was the public face. To the world, they were the perfect team, unstoppable, but the perfect image was a lie. Margot's suspicions had started small. A stray text message flashing on Victor's phone, a meeting that ran suspiciously late, and his sudden interest in late-night work trips. Initially, she had dismissed them, convincing herself she was being paranoid. But Margot's instincts, honed through years of negotiation and analysis, refused to be ignored. Something was wrong. That afternoon, as she flipped through Victor's calendar, a shared digital document they had both used for years, she noticed an appointment that didn't match his usual schedule. It was a dinner reservation at an upscale restaurant. Her name wasn't on it. She closed the laptop with a quiet snap and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced through scenarios, but each ended with the same conclusion. Victor was hiding something. She needed to know what. The following evening, Victor came home late, the scent of expensive cologne clinging to his clothes. Margot was waiting. For him in the kitchen, a glass of red wine in hand. She forced a smile as he entered. "Long day?" she asked, her tone light but probing. Victor loosened his tie and nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, meetings ran over, you know how it is." Margot's smile didn't waver, but inside, anger simmered. She checked his calendar. There were no meetings scheduled for the evening. "Of course," she replied. "I'm glad you're home now." As he disappeared into the bedroom, Margot felt the weight of his lies pressing down on her chest. She needed proof, and she knew exactly how to get it. Margot called Sofia Alvarez the next morning. Sofia, her closest friend since college, was a journalist known for uncovering scandals in high places. If anyone could help Margot uncover the truth, it was Sofia. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sofia asked, after Margot explained her suspicions. "I'm sure," Margot said firmly. "I need to know if he's lying to me, and if he is." Her voice trailed off, but Sofia could hear the resolve in her tone. "Okay," Sofia said. "Let's start with the basics. Do you have access to his email or phone?" Margot hesitated. "I've never invaded his privacy like that before." Margot, he's already invaded your trust, Sophia pointed out. You deserve to know the truth, Margot took a deep breath and nodded, even though Sophia couldn't see her. You're right. I'll do whatever it takes. Later that night, while Victor slept, Margot carefully unlocked his phone. Her hands trembled as she navigated through his messages. She hated what she was doing, but the alternative, living in ignorance, was worse. She found what she was looking for in less than 5 minutes. A string of messages between Victor and a contact saved as LV. The texts were flirtatious, even explicit, leaving no room for doubt. Margot's stomach churned as she read the words, each one driving a dagger deeper into her chest. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow, one message read. Dinner was perfect. You looked stunning. Margot's eyes blurred with tears, but she refused to let herself cry. She took screenshots of the messages and sent them to her own phone. If Victor was capable of this betrayal, who knew what else he might try to hide? The next morning, Margot called Sophia again. It's worse than I thought, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. What did you find? Sophia asked. Margot explained the messages. Sophia listened quietly, then said, We need to figure out who LV is. That's the key to understanding the full scope of this. Margot agreed. They spent hours piecing together clues, using the information Margot had gathered from Victor's phone. Finally, they identified her, Lydia Vance, a junior executive at Lane Industries. Of course, Margot muttered bitterly. She remembered Lydia's overly enthusiastic demeanor during meetings, the way her laughter lingered a little too long when Victor spoke. It all made sense now. Sophia's voice broke through her thoughts. What's the plan? Margot's jaw tightened. I'm not going to confront him. Not yet. If he's betrayed me this way, there's more he's hiding. I'll find out everything, and when I'm ready, he'll regret ever underestimating me. That night, Margot looked at Victor across the dinner table. He smiled, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. For the first time in their marriage, Margot felt no love for him. Only cold determination. Victor had chosen to betray her. Now she would show him the cost of his choices. Margot Lane's life began to take on an eerie sense of routine in the days following her discovery. She woke up, went to work at Lane Industries, attended meetings, smiled politely, and played the role of the devoted wife. Beneath the surface, however, every move she made was calculated. She was watching, listening, and planning. Victor was as oblivious as ever. He continued his clandestine meetings with Lydia Vance, the junior executive he thought of as a secret escape from the pressures of his marriage. Margot's facade was so convincing that Victor never suspected she had unearthed his betrayal. She allowed him to believe she was none the wiser, but she was documenting every indiscretion and building a case against him. One afternoon, Margot sat in her office, staring at the company's financial records. Something wasn't adding up. Victor had always handled the broader aspects of their finances, while Margot's strength lay in analyzing trends and spotting anomalies. As she combed through the data, a pattern emerged. Funds were being funneled into accounts she didn't recognize. The amounts were significant, yet carefully hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions. Margot's stomach churned. She suspected Victor was stealing from the company, but she needed proof. This wasn't just about the money, it was about integrity, about how far he was willing to go in his betrayal. That evening, Margot sat in the dimly lit den, her laptop balanced on her knees. Sophia was on the other end of a secure video call, her face serious as she listened to Margot's findings. "He's laundering money through shell accounts," Margot said, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "It's been going on for months, maybe even years. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner." Sophia nodded. "You were focused on building the company, Margot." Victor knew that. "He's been taking advantage of your trust." Margot clenched her jaw. "What do I do now? If I confront him, he'll find a way to deny everything." "You need to gather more evidence," Sophia advised. "Enough to ensure he can't weasel out of it. And you'll need an ally who can help you navigate this legally." Margot's mind immediately went to Detective Raymond Cross, the investigator who had recently been looking into Lane Industries for unrelated financial discrepancies. Margot hadn't taken the inquiries seriously before, but now they seemed like a lifeline. The next day, Margot requested a meeting with Detective Cross. They met in a quiet corner of a local coffee shop. Cross, a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet authority, regarded Margot with suspicion at first. "I'm not sure why you're here," he said, folding his arms. "Lane Industries has been less than cooperative with our investigation so far." "I didn't know about the investigation until recently," Margot admitted. "But now that I do, I want to help. I think my husband is involved in something illegal, and I have evidence to prove it." Cross raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Margot slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of the financial anomalies she had discovered, along with screenshots of Victor's encrypted communications. Cross flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. "This is a start," he said finally. "But it's not enough to build a solid case. We'll need more. Bank statements, transaction histories, anything that ties these accounts back to Victor directly." "I can get that," Margot said, her voice firm, "but I need your help to make sure he doesn't catch on." Cross hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but understand this. If you're lying or withholding anything, it'll come back on you. Do you understand?" "I do," Margot said. "All I want is the truth." That night, Margot began the painstaking process of digging deeper into Victor's schemes. She stayed up late, poring over company records and personal documents. The more she uncovered, the more disgusted she felt. Victor wasn't just stealing from the company, he was setting her up to take the fall. In a hidden file on Victor's laptop, Margot found a series of emails between him and Lydia. They discussed transferring funds, covering their tracks, and most damning of all, plans to frame Margot for embezzlement. One email read, "Once everything is in place, Margot will have no choice but to step down. The board will eat her alive, then it's just us." Margot's breath caught in her throat. She had expected betrayal, but this? Victor was willing to destroy her entirely, both personally and professionally. The next morning, Margot met Sophia again. This time, her hands were steady and her voice was cold as she recounted what she had found. "He's planning to pin everything on me," she said. "He'll ruin my reputation, my career, my life. I can't let that happen." Sophia placed a comforting hand on her arm. "You won't. You're smarter than him, Margot. He's underestimated you, and that's his biggest mistake." Margot nodded, determination hardening her features. "I'm going to bring him down, not just for me, but for everyone he's betrayed." By the time Victor returned home that evening, Margot had perfected her mask of calm. She greeted him with a warm smile, kissed his cheek, and asked about his day. Victor, as always, took her demeanor at face value. He had no idea that the woman he thought he controlled was systematically dismantling his web of lies. As Victor poured himself a drink, Margot watched him from across the room. Her heart no longer ached when she looked at him. There was only a steely resolve to see her plan through. "How was work?" Victor asked, his tone casual. Busy, Margot replied. But productive. Things are finally starting to fall into place. Victor chuckled. That's my girl, always on top of things. Margot smiled, but inside she was already counting the days until his world came crashing down. Margot Lane's resolve only grew stronger as the days went by. She now had a clear understanding of Victor's betrayal and his intentions to destroy her. With Detective Raymond Cross on her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, though the path ahead was fraught with danger. At Lane Industries, Margot maintained her usual composed demeanor. She had taken to walking the office floors, observing her employees and discreetly noting Victor's interactions with Lydia. Every glance they exchanged, every hushed conversation they shared, fed Margot's determination to dismantle their schemes. One afternoon, she intercepted a courier delivering an envelope addressed to Lydia. The courier, a young intern eager to impress, handed it over without hesitation when Margot claimed it was confidential. In the privacy of her office, Margot carefully opened the envelope and found documents detailing an off-the-books transaction involving one of Lane Industries' subsidiaries. The amounts matched the discrepancies she had found in the financial records. This is the smoking gun, Margot muttered to herself. She scanned the documents, took photos, and resealed the envelope before having it delivered to Lydia's desk. It was a small but crucial step in ensuring that Lydia and Victor's activities were fully exposed. Later that evening, Margot met with Detective Cross in a discreet location. The evidence she had gathered thus far filled a folder that she handed to him with steady hands. This confirms your suspicions, Cross said as he reviewed the documents. Victor and Lydia are siphoning money through shell companies, but this isn't just corporate fraud. These transactions tie back to offshore accounts that could implicate them in international money laundering. Margot's stomach turned at the revelation. She had expected betrayal on a personal and professional level, but this was a new layer of corruption. What happens now? She asked. We'll need to track these accounts and gather more concrete evidence before we can bring charges, Cross said. But you need to be careful, Margot. If Victor suspects you're onto him, he could become dangerous. I can't handle Victor, Margot said, her voice steady. Just tell me what you need, and I'll get it. Cross gave her a long, measured look. You're putting yourself at risk, you know that, right? Margot nodded. I've come too far to stop now. Meanwhile, Victor was growing increasingly paranoid. The stress of keeping his schemes hidden was beginning to take its toll. He started snapping at employees, and his once charming demeanor had given way to a short temper and frequent outbursts. Lydia noticed the change and confronted him one evening in his office. What's wrong with you? Lydia demanded, crossing her arms. You've been acting like a ticking time bomb. Victor glared at her. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? If Margot finds out what we've been doing, she won't, Lydia interrupted. She's too busy playing the perfect wife to notice anything. You need to calm down. But Victor couldn't calm down. He knew Margot too well. Her intelligence and resourcefulness were what had drawn him to her in the first place, and now those same qualities made her a threat. He resolved to tighten his grip on the situation, starting with keeping a closer eye on her. Margot anticipated Victor's move. She had deliberately left small breadcrumbs to make him feel as though he was still in control. It wasn't long before Victor began asking her pointed questions about her schedule and her interactions at work. You've been working late a lot lately, Victor said one evening as they sat down for dinner. Is everything all right? Margot smiled sweetly. Just some new projects I've taken on. You know how it is, trying to keep the company ahead of the competition. Victor nodded, but his eyes narrowed. Margot could feel his suspicion growing, but she remained unbothered. Let him watch. she thought. The more he underestimated her, the better. As the days turned into weeks, Margot's network of allies grew. Sophia had enlisted a trusted contact in media who began discreetly looking into Victor's business dealings. Together, they uncovered connections to high-profile investors who had unknowingly become complicit in his schemes. Margot knew that exposing these ties would create a domino effect, toppling Victor's carefully constructed facade. One evening, as Margot reviewed the latest findings with Sophia, her friend's expression grew serious. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sophia asked. "When this goes public, it's going to be messy. Victor won't go down without a fight." Margot met Sophia's gaze. "I'm ready. I've spent years building this company and supporting Victor. He's taken everything from me, and now it's my turn to take it back." Victor, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued his affair with Lydia. They met in secret, discussing their plans to oust Margot and solidify their control over the company. But cracks were beginning to show in their relationship. Lydia's ambition clashed with Victor's growing paranoia, and their once steamy affair was now fraught with tension. "You're spiraling," Lydia said during one of their heated arguments. "If you can't keep it together, this whole plan is going to fall apart." Victor slammed his fist on the desk. "Don't lecture me. I've come too far to let this slip away now." Lydia crossed her arms, her expression icy. "Just remember who's been covering for you this whole time. If I go down, you go down with me." Margot's plan was nearing its final stages. She had amassed enough evidence to expose Victor's crimes and was working with Cross to ensure the legal side of the operation was airtight. But she knew that the real battle would come when Victor realized he had been outplayed. One night, as Margot sat alone in the den, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The woman she had been, before discovering Victor's betrayal, felt like a distant memory. She was no longer the devoted wife or the trusting partner. She was something much stronger, a survivor. As the clock struck midnight, Margot closed her laptop and rose from her chair. The next steps would require precision and courage, but she was ready. The endgame was in sight, and she would not falter. The evening air was thick with tension as Margot finalized the next step of her plan. The pieces were moving, and she knew that one wrong move could send everything spiraling out of control. With Sophia's help, she had scheduled an exclusive meeting with a prominent investigative journalist, Claire Dubois. Claire's reputation for exposing high-stakes scandals preceded her, and Margot needed someone fearless to bring Victor's crimes to light. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Margot arrived early, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room for any signs of trouble. Sophia had insisted on tagging along, sitting a few tables away to keep watch. When Claire arrived, her presence was commanding. She was dressed in a tailored suit, her auburn hair pulled back into a neat bun. Claire slid into the booth across from Margot and wasted no time getting to the point. "You've got my attention, Mrs. Lane. What do you have for me?" Margot slid a folder across the table. "This is just the beginning. Financial records, offshore accounts, connections to illegal activities. Victor Lane has been running a criminal empire under the guise of a legitimate business." Claire's expression remained unreadable as she flipped through the documents. "These are solid leads, but I'll need more than this to run a story. If I'm going to take down someone as powerful as Victor, I need irrefutable evidence." Margot nodded. "I'm working with Detective Raymond Cross. He's building a case, but I need the public to know what's happening before Victor can cover his tracks." Claire leaned back, studying Margot intently. "You're not just doing this for justice, are you? This is personal." Margot met her gaze without flinching. It's both. Victor betrayed me, and he's hurt countless others in the process. This ends now. After a long pause, Claire nodded. All right, I'll start digging. But be prepared, Mrs. Lane. Once this goes public, there's no going back. Back at Lane Industries, Victor was becoming increasingly erratic. He had noticed subtle shifts in Margot's behavior, her late nights, her cool detachment during their interactions. It was unlike her to be so aloof, and it made him uneasy. One afternoon, he summoned Lydia to his office. She arrived looking as polished as ever, but her confidence faltered when she saw the storm brewing in Victor's eyes. "What's going on?" Lydia asked, closing the door behind her. Victor leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "I think Margot knows something. She's up to something, and I need to figure out what it is." Lydia frowned. "How? We've been careful." "Not careful enough," Victor snapped. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "I need you to keep an eye on her, find out who she's talking to, where she's going. If she's building a case against us, we'll need to act fast." Lydia hesitated. "And what if she's on to me?" Victor's expression hardened. "Then you do whatever it takes to protect yourself. And me." Margot's alliance with Detective Cross deepened as they worked together to piece together the full extent of Victor's crimes. Late one night, Cross called her with an update. "We've traced more offshore accounts," Cross said. "The amounts are staggering. This isn't just corporate fraud anymore. We're talking about funding for organized crime networks. Victor's in deep." Margot's grip tightened on her phone. "What's the next step?" "We're coordinating with federal authorities," Cross replied. "But I'm warning you, Margot. If Victor catches wind of this, he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself. You need to be careful." "I'm always careful," Margot said, her voice steely. The following evening, Margot attended a charity gala hosted by one of Lane Industries' key investors. Victor had insisted they make a public appearance together, a charade to maintain the illusion of their perfect marriage. Margot played her part flawlessly, smiling and engaging with guests, while keeping a close eye on Victor and Lydia. At one point, Margot excused herself and slipped into a quiet corner to make a phone call. Sophia answered on the first ring. "How's it going?" Sophia asked. "Victor's distracted," Margot said. "It's the perfect time to plant the next piece of evidence." "Be careful," Sophia warned. "You're walking a fine line." "I know," Margot replied before ending the call. She made her way to Victor's office on the upper floor of the venue, her heart pounding. Inside, she planted a flash drive containing falsified emails that implicated Lydia in the offshore transactions. It was a calculated risk designed to sow doubt and discord between Victor and his mistress. The next morning, Victor received an anonymous email with screenshots of the planted emails. His face darkened as he read the message. "Do you really know who you're trusting?" He immediately confronted Lydia, slamming the printed emails onto her desk. "Care to explain this?" Victor demanded. Lydia's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. I don't know where these came from. Someone's trying to frame me." "Convenient," Victor sneered. "First, Margot starts acting suspicious, and now this. You expect me to believe it's all a coincidence?" Lydia's temper flared. "You've been paranoid for weeks, and now you're turning on me? I've been nothing but loyal to you." The argument escalated, their voices echoing through the office. Margot, watching from a distance, felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and the cracks in their alliance were beginning to show. As the tension between Victor and Lydia grew, Margot continued to work tirelessly behind the scenes. She knew the endgame was approaching, and every Moves she made brought her closer to reclaiming her life and exposing the truth. But Victor wasn't done yet. Sensing the walls closing in, he began making plans of his own. And Margot knew that the most dangerous phase of the game was yet to come. Victor Lane was unraveling. The facade of control he had carefully cultivated over the years was slipping. The email implicating Lydia haunted him, feeding into his paranoia. The once unshakable partnership between them was now a powder keg, ready to explode. Margot, meanwhile, moved forward with her plan, her resolve unwavering, as she prepared for the next decisive move. The morning started with Victor summoning an emergency board meeting. Margot, ever the picture of poise, sat quietly at the far end of the table as Victor addressed the members. "I've received troubling information," Victor announced, pacing the room. "There have been unauthorized activities within our company. While I'm working to resolve these issues, I need your cooperation and discretion." Margot observed the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence in Victor clearly shaken. She remained silent, letting him twist in his own discomfort. When the meeting adjourned, Victor approached Margot in the corridor. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. Margot gave him a placid smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Victor glanced around before lowering his voice. "I know you've been busy lately, late nights, unusual meetings. I hope you're not forgetting where your loyalties lie." Margot tilted her head, feigning confusion. "My loyalties?" "Victor, everything I do is for this company, for us." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further. As he walked away, Margot's smile faded. She knew Victor's paranoia was reaching dangerous levels. Later that evening, Margot met with Detective Cross to discuss the next phase of their operation. They sat in a quiet diner, going over the evidence she'd gathered. "Victor's growing suspicious," Margot said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I can feel him watching me. We need to act quickly," Cross nodded. "We're almost there. The federal agents I've been working with are finalizing the case. Once we have their approval, we can move forward with arrests." Margot's lips pressed into a thin line. "Good, because if we wait too long, he'll find a way to cover his tracks." Cross's expression softened. "Margot, are you sure you're ready for this? Once the arrests are made, your name will be in the spotlight. There's no turning back." She met his gaze. "I've been ready since the day I found out who Victor really is." Victor's paranoia continued to fester. He had hired a private investigator to follow Margot, desperate to uncover what she was hiding. The investigator's reports were vague: frequent meetings with an unknown man, late nights at the office, but nothing conclusive. Still, Victor's imagination filled in the gaps. One evening, as Margot returned home, she found Victor waiting for her in the living room. He was holding a glass of scotch, his expression dark. "Long night?" he asked, his tone cold. Margot set her purse down and met his gaze evenly. "Just work. You know how demanding the board can be." Victor's jaw tightened. "I hope that's all it is." Margot didn't flinch. "What exactly are you implying?" He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "I'm saying that I don't appreciate being kept in the dark. We're supposed to be partners, Margot." "Partners," she repeated, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Is that what we are?" Victor's face hardened, but before he could respond, Margot turned and walked away, leaving him stewing in his own anger. The following day, Margot received a text from Sophia. It was a single sentence. "Claire's ready." Margot felt a surge of determination. She had been feeding Claire carefully curated pieces of information, ensuring that the journalist had everything she needed to publish a damning exposé on Victor Now the final piece was in place. That evening, Margot and Sophia met with Claire in a secluded office space. Claire's eyes gleamed with excitement as she reviewed the latest documents. "This is it," Claire said, her voice firm. "Once this goes live, Victor Lane's name will be synonymous with scandal." Margot's expression was resolute. "Make sure it's airtight. I don't want him slipping through the cracks." Claire nodded. "You have my word." Victor's world began to crumble the next morning. The expose hit every major news outlet detailing his involvement in financial fraud, money laundering, and connections to organized crime. The headline was damning: "The Double Life of Victor Lane, CEO or Criminal Mastermind." As Margot sat in her office, her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. The board was in chaos, investors were panicking, and Victor was nowhere to be found. Sophia burst into Margot's office, her face flushed with excitement. "You did it," she said. "The media's tearing him apart." Margot allowed herself a small smile. "This is just the beginning. The authorities will handle the rest." Victor, meanwhile, was holed up in a luxury hotel, frantically trying to control the damage. He called Lydia, but she didn't answer. He tried contacting his lawyers, only to find that many of them had already distanced themselves from him. In his desperation, he called Margot. When she answered, her tone was calm. "Margot," he began, his voice shaky. "We need to talk." "About what?" she replied coolly. "You've seen the news. This is a coordinated attack. Someone's trying to destroy me." Margot's silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her words were measured. "Maybe you should consider why someone would go to such lengths, Victor. Actions have consequences." Before he could respond, she ended the call. Margot met with Detective Cross later that day. "The federal agents are ready to move," Cross said. "Victor's arrest is imminent." Margot nodded. "Good. It's time for him to face the consequences." As she left the meeting, Margot felt a sense of vindication. For years, she had endured Victor's betrayal and manipulation. Now, she was reclaiming her life, one calculated move at a time. But Margot knew that Victor wouldn't go down without a fight. The game was far from over, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. Margot stared at the burning embers. In her fireplace, the faint crackle echoing in the silent room. She knew Victor was onto her, but she also knew that desperation would make him sloppy. The fallout from her planted emails was more than she had hoped for. Victor's relationship with Lydia had become strained, with arguments leaking out into the office gossip mill. Sophia had relayed the latest from her sources. Victor was losing his grip. But Margot also understood that a cornered man was dangerous. She needed to strike before he regrouped. The next phase of Margot's plan hinged on the cooperation of an unlikely ally, Daniel Marks, Victor's longtime business associate. Daniel had been Victor's right-hand man for years, but his loyalty had waned after a series of broken promises and unfulfilled deals. Margot had spent weeks cultivating a connection with him, feeding him just enough truth to stoke his resentment. They met at a discreet bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Daniel arrived late, his expression guarded but curious. "You've been cryptic," Daniel said, settling into the booth across from Margot. "What's this about?" Margot slid a folder across the table, her signature move. "This is about your future, and about bringing Victor Lane down." Daniel hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were documents detailing Victor's embezzlement schemes, all traced back to shell companies Daniel had unknowingly signed off on. His face darkened as he scanned the pages. "He's been using me as a scapegoat," Daniel muttered, his voice low. "And he will throw you under the bus the moment it benefits him," Margot said. "But we can stop him, together." Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with equal parts anger and apprehension. "What's your angle in this, Margot? You're not exactly known for playing the victim." Margot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let's just say I'm tired of being underestimated. Are you in, or are you content to let Victor ruin you?" After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "I'm in." Victor's paranoia reached new heights in the days that followed. He'd doubled his security detail, restricted access to key areas of Lane Industries, and even started keeping his phone in a signal-blocking case. Lydia's pleas for reassurance fell on deaf ears as Victor became increasingly erratic. "You're shutting me out," Lydia snapped during one of their heated arguments in his office. "How am I supposed to help you if you don't trust me?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "Help me? The last time I trusted someone, they planted evidence to make me doubt you. For all I know, you could be working against me too." Lydia's face flushed with anger. "You're losing it, Victor. And if you're not careful, you're going to lose everything." Victor didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to his computer, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Lydia stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She was starting to see the cracks in Victor's armor, and for the first time, she began to question her loyalty. Meanwhile, Detective Cross was making headway on the case. The evidence Margot had provided, combined with his own findings, painted a damning picture of Victor's criminal activities, but Cross was also beginning to see the toll the plan was taking on Margot. They met in his office late one night, stacks of paperwork cluttering the desk between them. "You're playing a dangerous game," Cross said, leaning back in his chair. "Victor's not going to go down without a fight." Margot's expression was unyielding. "I've come too far to back out now." Cross studied her for a moment before sighing. "Just promise me one thing. When this is over, walk away. Don't let revenge consume you." Margot didn't respond. Immediately, when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "I'll walk away when Victor has nothing left to hurt me with." The tipping point came when Daniel leaked critical documents to Claire Dubois. The investigative journalist had been working tirelessly since her meeting with Margot, and the new information provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Claire's exposé was explosive, detailing years of corruption, fraud, and connections to organized crime. Victor Lane's name was splashed across every major news outlet within hours. Victor watched the news coverage from his office, his face pale. He slammed his fist on the desk, sending papers flying. "Get me my lawyer," he barked at his assistant. "Now!" But even as Victor scrambled to contain the damage, the fallout was already spreading. Investors began pulling out, stocks plummeted, and federal investigators launched an official inquiry. Margot's plan was unfolding perfectly. But Margot knew better than to celebrate prematurely. She'd anticipated Victor's next move, an attempt to flee. Sophia's sources confirmed that Victor had been quietly liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country. "He's planning to disappear," Sophia said over the phone. "What's the play?" Margot's voice was cold. "We make sure he has nowhere to run." She contacted Cross, who coordinated with federal authorities to monitor Victor's movements. Margot also reached out to Daniel, leveraging his insider knowledge to ensure that every avenue Victor might use to escape was blocked. The final confrontation came 2 days later. Victor had booked a private flight under a pseudonym, but as he arrived at the airport, he found himself surrounded by law enforcement. Cross stepped forward, holding up a warrant. "Victor Lane, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit organized crime," Cross said, his voice steady. Victor's face twisted in fury. "This is a setup! I'm being framed!" "Save it for the court," Cross replied, signaling for the officers to take Victor into custody. As Victor was led away in handcuffs, Margot watched from a distance. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. The battle was over, but the war wasn't finished yet. Victor's arrest was just the beginning of his downfall. Margot still had one more card to play, a final move that would ensure she reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her power. Victor paced his office, his movements restless and agitated. Papers were strewn across the desk, a chaotic reflection of his fractured state of mind. The tension between him and Lydia had reached a breaking point, and Margot's inscrutable calm only deepened his paranoia. He felt trapped, hunted, and unable to determine who was pulling the strings. The door opened abruptly, and Victor's assistant hesitantly stepped in. "Mr. Lane, the board members are requesting an emergency meeting," she said, her voice uncertain. Victor's head snapped up. "Emergency meeting? About what?" "They didn't specify," she replied, "but they sounded concerned." Victor's jaw tightened. He could sense the walls closing in, but he had no idea which crack in his carefully constructed empire was now threatening to collapse. The boardroom was tense when Victor entered, the members' expressions guarded. His usual confidence faltered as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get to it," he said curtly, his tone masking his unease. One of the senior members, a steely-eyed man named Howard, cleared his throat. "Victor, we've received some troubling information. There are rumors circulating about financial discrepancies and possible legal violations involving offshore accounts." Victor's stomach churned, but he kept his composure. "Rumors? From where?" Howard slid a folder across the table. Victor opened it, his heart sinking as he saw copies of documents Margot and Detective Cross had strategically leaked. They were damning enough to raise suspicion, but not so complete as to expose Margot's involvement. "This is nonsense," Victor said, forcing a laugh. "Fabricated by competitors trying to tarnish our reputation." "Perhaps," Howard said, his tone skeptical. "But we've also been contacted by an investigative journalist who claims to have more evidence. She's planning to go public." Victor's facade cracked for a moment. "Who?" Claire Dubois, another board member, replied. "She's well known for taking down high-profile figures. If she's involved, this could be serious." Victor clenched his fists under the table. Margot's handiwork was becoming increasingly clear. He needed to act fast to regain control. Meanwhile, Margot met with Detective Cross in a secluded diner. She'd been careful not to meet in the same place twice, knowing Victor's reach extended far beyond Lane Industries. "The leaks are working," Cross said, sipping his coffee. "Victor's under pressure, and the board is starting to turn on him, but he's not going down without a fight. My sources say he's already looking for ways to bury this." Margot nodded, her expression calm but determined. "That's why we need the next step. Have you secured the warrants?" Cross slid a folder across the table. "These authorize searches of his personal and company accounts, but it's risky, Margot. If he gets wind of this, he'll retaliate." "Let him try," Margot said, her voice cold. "He's already lost the element of surprise." Cross hesitated. "I've also been looking into Lydia. If we can flip her, it could be the final nail in Victor's coffin." Margot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Lydia's loyalty to Victor is fragile. It won't take much to push her over the edge." Lydia sat in her apartment, her nerves frayed. Victor's accusations and the mounting pressure at work had left her feeling isolated and vulnerable. Her phone buzzed and she hesitated before answering. "Hello? Lydia Vance?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, who is this?" "Detective Raymond Cross. I'd like to talk to you about Victor Lane." Lydia's heart raced. "I don't know what you're talking about." I think you do, Cross said evenly. And I think you know Victor will throw you under the bus to save himself. But if you cooperate with us, I can help you. Lydia hesitated. She'd seen glimpses of Victor's ruthlessness, but hearing it stated so plainly sent a chill down her spine. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice shaky. Don't take too long, Cross warned. Time's running out. That night, Victor confronted Margot in their home. His usually smooth demeanor was replaced by barely contained fury. What have you been up to, Margot? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Margot feigned innocence. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play games with me, Victor snarled. I know you've been working against me, leaking information, turning the board against me. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Margot's calm facade didn't waver. If you're so sure, why haven't you done anything about it? Victor took a step closer, his eyes blazing. Because I'm giving you one chance. To stop. Call off whoever you're working with and stay out of my way. Margot met his gaze, her voice steady. You're afraid, Victor, and you should be. Everything you've built is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Victor's hand twitched, but he stopped himself from acting on his anger. Instead, he stormed out of the room, leaving Margot standing there, unshaken. The following day, Lydia showed up unannounced at Cross's office. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled as she placed a flash drive on his desk. This has everything, she said quietly. Victor's transactions, his emails, even recordings of our conversations. He's been reckless and I kept everything, just in case. Cross picked up the drive, his expression a mix of surprise and satisfaction. You're making the right choice, Lydia. Just make sure he pays for what he's done, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. And keep me out of it. I don't want to be dragged down with him. We'll do our best, Cross assured her. As Victor's empire began to crumble, Margot prepared for the final act. The public exposure of his crimes was imminent, and the power he'd wielded over her for so long was slipping through his fingers. But Margot knew better than to underestimate him. The most dangerous animal was one backed into a corner, and Victor Lane was far from done. The fallout from Victor's arrest sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Lane Industries faced public scrutiny, and the board of directors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Margot watched the chaos unfold from the relative safety of her home, her mind racing with the possibilities ahead. Sophia sat across from her, sipping a cup of coffee. You've done it, Margot. Victor's empire is crumbling, and you're still standing. Margot gave a small smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease. This isn't over. Victor may be in custody, but he's not out of moves. I need to ensure he has no leverage left. What's the plan? Sophia asked. Margot hesitated before replying. Detective Cross believes there are more accomplices tied to Victor's operations. If we can expose them, we'll solidify the case against him. Meanwhile, in a sterile interrogation room, Victor sat across from Detective Cross. The once confident businessman now looked disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his demeanor unsteady. You think you've won, Cross? Victor sneered. You have no idea what's coming. Cross leaned forward, his expression calm but firm. We've got enough evidence to put you away for decades, Lane, but if you cooperate, the DA might. Consider leniency, Victor smirked. Leniency? That's rich. You think I'll roll over that easily? I have friends in high places, people who won't let this stand. Cross's eyes narrowed. Those friends won't save you when the truth comes out. It's only a matter of time before we dismantle everything you've built. Victor's smirk faltered, but he remained silent, his mind working furiously. Lydia, Vance was not faring any better. The media had caught wind of her involvement, and her once glamorous life was now in tatters. Paparazzi hounded her every move, and her name became synonymous with scandal. Alone in her apartment, Lydia stared at her phone, contemplating whether to call Victor. Her decision was made for her when an unknown number flashed across the screen. Hesitantly, she answered. "Ms. Vance, this is Detective Cross. We need to talk." Lydia's heart sank. "I have nothing to say." "I think you'll want to hear this," Cross replied. "Victor's already implicated you in his schemes. The longer you stay silent, the worse it will get for you." "He's lying," Lydia said, though her voice wavered. "Maybe," Cross said. "But if you cooperate, you'll have a chance to tell your side of the story. Otherwise, you'll go down with him." Lydia's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want from me?" "Meet me at the station," Cross said. "We can discuss the terms there." Margot received a call from Cross later that evening. "We're making progress." Lydia agreed to talk, and she's already given us leads on additional accounts and accomplices. "That's good news," Margot said, "but it's not enough. Victor has always been meticulous. There's something we're missing." Cross hesitated before replying. "There's one more thing. Victor's legal team is pushing for bail. If he gets out, he could disappear." Margot's stomach churned. "We can't let that happen. What can I do?" "Stay vigilant," Cross said. "If Victor tries to reach out to you or anyone close to you, let me know immediately." Margot agreed, but the conversation left her feeling uneasy. Victor was a master manipulator, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he had one last card to play. Her instincts proved correct when, a few days later, she received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a cryptic message. "You can't win a game you don't understand." Margot's hands trembled as she read the note. It was unmistakably Victor's handwriting. She immediately called Sophia and Cross, both of whom arrived within the hour. "This is a threat," Sophia said, pacing the living room. "He's trying to rattle you." "Or it's a clue," Cross said, examining the note. "Victor thrives on control. If he's sending messages like this, it means he still thinks he has the upper hand." Margot nodded. "Then we need to figure out what he's planning before he can act on it." Victor's game became clearer when Cross uncovered a hidden offshore account linked to a shell company. The account had been recently accessed, and a significant sum of money had been withdrawn. The timing coincided with Victor's arrest, suggesting he had prepared an escape plan. Margot felt a surge of anger and determination. "He's trying to run. We need to stop him." "I'll notify the federal authorities," Cross said, "but we need more evidence to freeze his assets and ensure he can't go anywhere." Margot turned to Sophia. "Can you reach out to your contacts? Maybe there's someone who can help trace the transactions." Sophia nodded. "I'll see what I can do." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Margot and her allies worked tirelessly to uncover Victor's remaining assets and connections. Sophia's contacts provided valuable information, and Cross coordinated with federal agents to build a stronger case. But Victor wasn't going down without a fight. From his cell, he orchestrated a smear campaign against Margot, leaking fabricated stories to the press that painted her as the mastermind behind the fraudulent activities. The media frenzy added another layer of stress to an already tense situation. "He's trying to discredit me," Margot said, her voice laced with frustration. "He knows that if I'm seen as unreliable, it could weaken the case against him." "Don't let it get to you," Sophia said. "The truth will come out." Margot took a deep breath, steeling herself. "It has to. We've come too far to let him win." As the pieces of Victor's empire continued to unravel, Margot prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that to truly bring him down, she would need to confront him face to face. The opportunity came sooner than expected, when Cross arranged for Margot to attend a deposition where Victor would be present. The day of the deposition, Margot dressed carefully, choosing a sharp black suit that exuded confidence. As she entered the room, Victor's gaze locked onto hers. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Victor's lips curled into a faint smile. Margot, always the fighter, Margot met his gaze without flinching. "And you're still the coward hiding behind lies and manipulation." Victor chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you've won, but you've only scratched the surface. This game isn't over." "Oh, it's over," Margot said, her voice steady. "You just don't realize it yet." The air was heavy with anticipation as Margot sat in her dimly lit study, poring over the final pieces of evidence. Every document, every recording, and every connection was meticulously laid out on the large oak table before her. Her plan was no longer just a means of survival. It was the culmination of weeks of pain, betrayal, and strategic maneuvering. She was ready to bring Victor to his knees. Across town, Victor was becoming increasingly restless. His paranoia had reached a fever pitch. The arguments with Lydia had grown explosive, and his once ironclad grip on his business empire was slipping. Margot's calculated leaks had driven away several key investors, leaving Victor scrambling to maintain control. "This is your fault," Victor barked at Lydia during one of their heated confrontations in his office. "If you'd just kept your head down and stayed loyal, we wouldn't be in this mess." Lydia glared at him, her hands trembling. "Loyal? I've risked everything."
"For you, Victor, don't you dare pin this on me. Margot's the one orchestrating all of this, and you've let her stay one step ahead." Victor slammed his fist on the desk, his face flushed with anger.
"She's nothing without me. I made her, and I'll make sure she pays for what she's done." Detective Cross, meanwhile, had assembled a team of federal agents to execute the final phase of their operation. Margot's evidence had not only exposed Victor's financial crimes but also linked him to dangerous criminal networks. Cross's sense of justice was reignited as he realized the magnitude of the case. "We move in tomorrow," Cross informed Margot during a late-night call. "Victor's house, his office, and the offshore accounts, all of it will be seized. We've got enough to take him down for good." Margot's voice was calm but resolute. "Make sure it's airtight, Detective. He'll try to wriggle his way out if there's even the slightest crack in the case." "It's airtight," Cross assured her. "But there's one thing you need to know. Once this goes public, your name will be tied to it. Are you ready for that?" Margot hesitated for only a moment. "Let them talk. I've spent too long in the shadows. It's time the world knows who Victor Lane really is." The next morning, Margot attended a routine board meeting at Lane Industries. Her demeanor was as composed as ever, but beneath the surface she was brimming with anticipation. She exchanged polite smiles with the executives, even as she noticed Victor's thinly veiled suspicion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, standing at the
head of the table,
"I'm aware of the recent challenges we've faced. Rest assured, I have everything under control." Margot suppressed a smirk as she watched him struggle to maintain his usual confidence. She knew his bravado was a fragile facade, but meeting adjourned, Victor pulled Margot aside. "We need to talk," he said, his tone low and menacing. "Of course," Margot replied smoothly, following him into his office. Once inside, Victor closed the door and turned to face her.
"I know what you've been doing, Margot. Don't think I'm blind." Margot raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Victor stepped closer, his voice a harsh whisper. "You've been digging?"
into my affairs, leaking information, turning people against me. Why? Margot met his gaze, her expression unyielding. Because you underestimated me, Victor. You thought you could betray me, destroy everything we built together, and walk away unscathed.
But you were wrong. For a moment, Victor was speechless. Then his lips twisted into a bitter smile. You're playing a dangerous game, Margot. You don't know who you're dealing with. Margot leaned in, her voice laced with quiet fury.
Neither do you. That evening, as Victor returned home, he found his mansion eerily silent. The staff had been sent away, and the only sound was the faint hum of the security system. He poured himself a drink and settled into his study, his mind racing with thoughts of Margot's defiance. Suddenly, the room was flooded with light as headlights appeared in the driveway. Victor's heart sank as he heard the unmistakable sound
of sirens. He rushed to the window and saw a convoy of police cars and unmarked vehicles surrounding the property.
A loud knock echoed through the house. "Victor Lane! This is the police! Open the door!" Panic gripped Victor as he realized the walls were closing in. He scrambled to gather anything incriminating, but it was too late. The front door burst open and armed officers swarmed the mansion. Victor tried to make a run for it, but Detective Cross intercepted him in the hallway. "Going somewhere?" Cross asked, his voice cold. Victor's shoulders slumped in defeat as the officers placed
him in handcuffs.
He was led out of the mansion, his once grand empire reduced to ashes. Watching from a distance, Margot felt a surge of vindication as she saw Victor being taken away. She'd won. But as the adrenaline subsided, a wave of emotions crashed over her. The cost of her victory was immense, and the scars of betrayal would remain with her forever. Sophia appeared at her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Margot. You did it." Margot nodded, her eyes fixed on the flashing lights. "Yes, but now I have to figure out what comes next." Victor Lane sat alone in the cavernous living room of his penthouse, nursing a glass of whiskey. The once pristine space reflected his spiraling life, with papers, empty bottles, and remnants of his unraveling schemes scattered across the marble floors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, but the events of the past few weeks had proven otherwise. Margot's relentless pursuit of justice, paired with Detective Cross's growing case, had backed Victor into a corner. His once loyal mistress, Lydia, had disappeared, leaving behind a scathing letter implicating him in their illicit dealings. The media frenzy had only grown since Claire Dubois published her explosive exposé, and Margot's public statements about their marriage had painted him as both a villain and a fool. Every ally he once trusted had abandoned him, and even his legal team seemed to have one foot out the door. He clenched his jaw, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He couldn't let this be the end. There had to be a way out, but before he could lose himself in the whiskey's comforting burn. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a blocked number. Victor hesitated before answering. "Hello? Victor Lane," came a voice he recognized immediately. It was Margot. Her tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that made his skin crawl. "What do you want, Margot?" he snapped, though his voice betrayed a hint of desperation. "Just a friendly reminder," she said coolly. "The walls are closing in. You've run out of moves. Surrender now and maybe, just maybe, you'll salvage a shred of dignity." Victor's grip on the phone tightened. "Don't you dare lecture me, Margot. You think you've won, but this isn't over." She let out a soft laugh, the kind that sent shivers down his spine. "Oh, Victor, it was over the moment you underestimated me. Enjoy the little time you have left." The line went dead. Detective Cross stood in the conference room of the precinct, a whiteboard behind him covered in notes, photos, and timelines. His team had been working tirelessly, and the evidence they'd gathered against Victor Lane was ironclad. Financial records, witness testimonies, Lydia's letter. It all painted a damning picture of corporate corruption and criminal conspiracy. "We're ready to move," Cross announced to his team. "Lane has no idea we've been monitoring his offshore accounts in real time. With this warrant, we'll freeze everything by morning." As his team dispersed to finalize preparations, Cross's phone buzzed. It was Margot. "Detective," she said, "I'm calling to make sure we're still on track." "We are," Cross replied. "By tomorrow, Victor Lane will have nothing left." Margot's voice was steady. "Good, because I've just sent him an invitation to a very special event. If all goes according to plan, he'll be there tonight." Cross frowned. "What
"Are you planning, Margot?" "Just tying up loose ends," she said cryptically, before hanging up. The event Margot had planned was held at the very estate where she and Victor had once hosted lavish parties. The sprawling mansion had been
transformed into a mock auction, its grand ballroom filled with familiar faces from their social circles. Invitations had been sent under the guise of a charity fundraiser, but the true purpose of the gathering was far more sinister. Margot stood at the center of the room, her presence commanding. She wore a sleek black gown that symbolized both mourning and power. As the guests mingled, their whispered conversations filled the air with speculation. Everyone was eager to see what Margot Lane had planned. Victor arrived late, his demeanor tense. He had received Margot's cryptic invitation earlier that day, and though he suspected a trap, his curiosity and arrogance had compelled him to attend. As he entered the ballroom, all eyes turned to him. The room fell silent. Margot stepped forward, a sly smile on her lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "thank you for joining me tonight. I've gathered you all here to unveil the truth."
"About a man who has deceived us all."
Victor's face darkened. "What are you playing at, Margot?" She ignored him, gesturing toward a large screen that descended from the ceiling. A series of incriminating documents and video recordings began to play, detailing Victor's crimes, in excruciating detail. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as the evidence unfolded. Victor's composure cracked. "This is outrageous! You have no proof!" Margot's smile widened. "Oh, but I do, and so do the authorities." At that moment, the ballroom doors burst open, and Detective Cross entered with his team. "Victor Lane," Cross announced, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." As the officers approached, Victor's defiance gave way to panic. He turned to Margot, his voice trembling. You did this. You destroyed everything." Margot met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "No, Victor, you destroyed yourself." As Victor was led away in handcuffs, the crowd began to disperse, the weight of the evening's revelations leaving them stunned. Margot watched from the balcony as the guests filed out, her heart heavy but resolute. Sophia joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did it?" Sophia said softly. Margot nodded. "I did, but the price was high." Sophia looked at her friend with admiration. "Sometimes justice demands sacrifices, but you've shown everyone that you can't silence the truth." Margot's gaze drifted toward the city skyline. She had won the battle, but the scars of Victor's betrayal would remain. Still, she knew she had reclaimed her life on her terms, and that was a victory worth savoring. As the gavel fell, sentencing Victor Lane to a lifetime behind bars, Margot Lane stood outside the courthouse, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, but emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. Lane Industries, once a symbol of their partnership, was now solely hers, a testament to her resilience and vision. The whispers of scandal that once haunted her had transformed into words of admiration as the world saw Margot not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. She gazed at the horizon, her future unwritten but filled with promise, and walked away with a quiet determination to begin again.